to NSF Live, to another episode of Europe's Future in Space. If you've been around for the last few weeks, you already know the deal. But if you're new, well, you might be wondering what's all this about. Well, the short answer is that here at NSF we thought it would be interesting to do a series of shows called Europe's Future in Space. And the way that we do these shows is we bring an official from the European space industry and have an interview with them, giving them a metaphorical stage to talk about what they're doing, what they're planning and everything. And let's be real, most of the time, this is something that you don't see everywhere else, right? So at least we give them a way to explain all of the cool stuff that they're working for Europe's future in space. Roll the intro.
And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal.
Flighting downside SC off. Bring in SC off. Off. It's orange!
145! Oh my god!
Decollage. Look at that. Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
The methane will be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You dead? Sure. We don't need any more of these.
Hello everyone, welcome to NSF Live. We have another great show here on Europe's Future in Space. This is going to be the 5th episode already of the series. And you know, we've had launch companies, we've had satellite companies, but we've never really had a launch site company, if you will. Today we'll be interviewing one of them. We're going to have Debbie Strang, CEO of SaxaVord Spaceport. Thank you for being here at NSF, Debbie.
Thanks for inviting me, Alex. It's whilst we are really busy doing what we're doing, we love coming on shows like this with a real opportunity to tell people what's actually going on and how they hopefully will then follow us to see where we're getting to as the year progresses.
Indeed. I mean, I'm really excited to, answer, for you to answer all the questions that we have, because I really have never had this opportunity. So I'm really full of questions. And of course, I'm sure a lot of people in the live chat right now are having lots of questions. So we're going to have Ryan Caden here in the background, grabbing all of those questions. Remember to tag at NASASpaceflight in chat so that we can put all of those into a queue that we have, a software that will be able to pull together all of those questions. And here, Ryan over here will be putting those out in, every now and then we'll be going to him for those questions. And also thanks to Jay King, he's going to be producing this show. He's also been arranging some of these interviews, and we have another show next week. I'm going to tease already that is very much in line with this kind of show that we have today with SaxaVord. But Debbie, one of the first questions that I always have whenever we have a guest here is like, okay, how did this company even came to being, right? But before even you get to answer that, we need to talk about the location, because we're having all of these sort of backgrounds that we have here and everything. Where is SaxaVord?
So it is in the Shetland Islands, and the Shetland Islands are a group of nearly 100 islands north of the UK. And as you've seen, scroll up. So right at the furthest north inhabited island called Unst. And we're at 60 degrees north. And as you can see there, to the east, that's Norway. So actually, Shetland, it was originally part of Norway and was gifted years ago back in the midst of history as part of a marriage agreement for somebody, royalty marrying some sort of royalty. And so it is part of the UK, but actually closer to Norway than mainland Scotland. So really quite unusual.
Yeah, I thought that was probably even more important than the other questions, because I know we have a lot of people from everywhere in the world, and some might know the Shetland Islands, but some others might not. And so I think having this unique opportunity to be able to interview a launch site company, I thought that was at least the first and foremost question. So now, why SaxaVord? Like, why make a spaceport out of there? You guys began, if I'm not mistaken, in 2017, right? Like, how that came to being.
So that's the date that we tend to quote more often than not. And the easiest place to start really is a government report. So a UK government report, 2017, called the SEPTA report. And what it did was a review of all the potential launch sites in Scotland for vertical launch to hit sun-synchronous and polar orbit. So quite specific in a way. And so a review of sites, generally they were going to be coastal, of course, for safety. And so, to be really honest, and this will probably surprise many folk, that we actually had no background in space whatsoever. So what we had was a business in Unst, this most northerly island. It was a former RAF base called RAF SaxaVord. And we'd converted the base, the quarters were converted to self-catering units. We had a hostel that was open in the summer. We had a restaurant. 10 years ago, we set up a distillery. So we're building this tourism destination because, as you can see from the footage, it is spectacularly beautiful. It is a stunning place to go, and people love to go to see the wildlife, to get a real sense of the wildness and what's special about Shetland. It has so much to offer. So we were doing that, and then all of a sudden, the UK government was a real emphasis on following the lead, of the States. You've been doing this for well over 50 years. The UK didn't continue its developments in space for whatever reason. This was a renewed initiative to say, right, let's look at sovereign launch capability. That's what it was all about. We need to look at the UK being able to launch and to hit these particular orbits. And it was just in black and white in the report. SaxaVord is the best place to hit sun-synchronous and polar orbits in the UK, if not Europe. And so when you see a report like that, regardless of whether you're involved in space, if you're involved in business, it's something that you have to take a look at. And I think because we've been involved in business on the island for it's nearly 20 years now, it was almost an obligation to the local people, because if we hadn't taken a look at it, it could have passed the island by. And what an opportunity that would have been missed for the local people. There's only 650 people on island, and it may not have happened had we not thought, oh my goodness, let's take a look at this. So a little unusual in a way, with no actual background in space, but that's how the whole thing started. Government report, let's investigate it.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of makes sense. We've seen a lot of different countries in general trying to get a foot into all of these, let's make a launch pad kind of business, I guess. But it's important, right? As you were mentioning, for to have different options, and that is precisely one of the great things, is that that location, as you were mentioning, allows companies to be able to reach polar and sun-synchronous orbits. But I'm seeing in these pictures, though, it seems a bit remote. How do you guys handle being able to convince companies, like, you gotta come here? It might be a little bit remote, though.
You're absolutely spot on, Alex. While it is beautiful, it is obviously remote. And I think, it's not just people outside the UK that don't understand what it's all about and what is there. People within the UK, many have not, visited Shetland and wouldn't know. So just a bit about the history. So Shetland has benefited. All their economic growth has been based on their location, and so oil and gas has been a major sector for them. It's not the top one, actually. Aquaculture, fishing, and what have you is their top business sector. So oil and gas, and the local council at the time worked with the oil companies and came up with an agreement to take a small percent of each barrel of oil that came in through Shetland. And so that allowed them to build infrastructure that you would not expect in Shetland. So whilst you're seeing the peninsula, Lamines Peninsula, the actual infrastructure to get to Shetland is really quite sophisticated. And that's a surprise to a lot of people. There is overnight freight from Aberdeen, every night. The roads are in far better condition than most of the rest of Scotland. It has got, on an island for 650 people, there is a public sports centre with a swimming pool for 650 people. I mean, this sort of thing would not have been done anywhere else in the UK. So it's a really surprising place, and the people are really open and innovative and, really willing to try new ventures. And of course, oil and gas, there's a sort of a downturn now with the emphasis on renewables and what have you. So I suppose Shetland in a way was more open to looking at whether space could work here. But you're right, convincing clients whether to come and work with us is another thing entirely. And it has taken a lot of time to persuade them. And really, the location and the safety and all the modelling for it is fine, but yes, they have to visit. They have to come and see what we have got and how we can host a company and how we can work with them. And the benefit is because, so the Lamines Peninsula, as you can see it now, that is the launch site. 3 launch pads, permission to launch up to 30 times a year. 2 miles from there is what was the old RAF SaxaVord. So we have got accommodation for 120 people at a push. We've got storage, we've got offices, we have got that supporting infrastructure that the rocket companies need. And that's quite unusual compared to some other spaceports. I've only been able to visit one, actually, Kodiak Island in Alaska. And in comparison, there's some commonality between us and Kodiak. They're called Pacific, whatever now, aren't they? They're not, but you know what I mean. Similar situation, but actually their accommodation and support is an hour and a half away. Ours is 5 minutes. So we can look after the rocket scientists and their companies. We have the facilities to be able to feed them, look after them, so they can focus on what they need to focus on. So whilst it may take a little longer to get to us, when you do, you are absolutely set up for launch. I think far better than many other spaceports. Have I sold it to you?
I have 2 questions, because I know our own Chris Bergen, he will probably ask, is there a football club and are there horses? He will be very much into that. But now, it's a bit more of a serious question, I guess. How's the internet access there? Is there a way for a certain company to live stream out there?
There is plenty of fibre going in all the time, absolutely.
Oh, nice.
And in fact, Shetland, has sort of strong links with the Faroe Islands too. So you couldn't build a spaceport without having sorted out that first, to be honest. That was absolutely key. And the UK, in fact, we were able to support the case by Shetland Council to get more funding from UK government to be able to do this. Absolutely. If we couldn't, we are a private sector company. We had to ensure that these basic needs were sorted before we even began. And what we did was, as I said, none of us had a background in space like anybody else, hugely excited and, looking at what was possible. So what we did in the early days, working with the council, was say, right, let's hold a conference and let's bring people who know about space to Shetland. So people came from European Space Agency and Strathclyde University, who are real leaders in space in all sorts of guises. People from Airbus, Ariane, we brought them to the site because we've got the ability to host them. And we spent 2 days and we are on that peninsula saying, can this work? Is this a good place? Because we didn't know. And when you have, leading people from the space sector saying, yes, this is the right place, you think, right, let's give it a go. And the council, as I say, were really on board, and that was hugely helpful. They funded actually a chartered flight to bring these people up, and they have really enabled us to move not as quickly as we wanted, but more quickly than perhaps otherwise might have been. So there are certain benefits, despite, as you say, looking at it, you think, oh my goodness. So to get to it, just to really set it in context, to get to it, you either go on an overnight ferry from Aberdeen and you arrive on mainland Shetland, as they call it. So you're in Lerwick, which is the town. It's got about 16,000 people in it. And then you drive 40 minutes. You get on your first ferry, 20 minutes. And these all sync into each other. Big ferries, drive on, drive off. Another 30 minutes drive, 5-minute ferry, 20 minutes drive. So I've made it seem more sort of complicated than it is. It all interconnects. Everything works most of the time. So whilst it's remote, it is accessible. And flights from Scotland, connecting flights from London, Aberdeen up to Sunborough. So it does all work far more than you might expect.
Well, I hope Kevin and our producers, Kevin and Daz, are hearing that, so we can get our own SaxaVord 24/7 live stream, I guess. But one of the other things as well that some people might be wondering, a location so far north, right? It's being being in the north, it's usual to hear all the time, oh, it's bad weather, but how actually is, like, how real is that for you guys up there in SaxaVord? Like, is it something that is a concern for your customers, the people that are going to launch from there? Like, is that something that you've been looking at?
Yes, and right from day one, again, you're hitting all the key points for us. And in fact, coming back to the fact that we're a private company, this has got to be successful. This is not a government venture where, more money can be ploughed into it until it works. This has got to be right from day one. So what we did was we looked at 10 years worth of weather data. Shetland, with its location, is excellent at collecting data on all sorts of things. But so 10 years of weather data, looking at the amount of launch windows. But rather than just rely on, UK experts, we did send the data to NASA and said, are we going to be wasting our time here? Or, is this a real sensible option? And they came back and said, almost we have as many launch windows as, say, Cape Canaveral, just because we do get a lot of wind. I'm not going to deny it, but sometimes it can just come through, blow through, and it's gone. So we do get it, but what we don't get is electric storms or hurricanes or snow. And so, you'll know every spaceport has its own weather challenges. So as long as you can still have those launch windows, and we will, if the launch companies want to, we will be able to launch all year round. It's inevitable. We think there'll be less in winter just because it's more uncomfortable for the whole team working out on site. But no, it absolutely is viable, or else we wouldn't have started it. But it is the question, and you're quite right again, when we're approached by a potential client, it's the data that they want almost before they get started on their, further requirements is what is possible. And we share the data with them so that they can see that, yeah, this is absolutely possible.
Yeah, and there's definitely already people using the spaceport. But before we get to that, I want to go to Ryan Caden, because I know we have already too many questions in chat. I'm sort of looking to it off to my side. Ryan, what are people asking about?
Well, we have a lot of questions. We have more questions at this point than we did last week. So I'll be honest. So there's a lot of people very interested in what SaxaVord is up to. First of all, Spirit Wolf is asking. You were mentioning access to the site. What about public access? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who are interested in coming along as a member of the public and viewing the launch. Are there any plans? Are there any facilities for SaxaVord to be able to host a public viewing for launches in the near future?
So this is another area that we've been working on almost for the past 3 or 4 years, actually. So at the moment, it's still a construction site as well as a spaceport. So anybody at the moment, if they come up to Island, we're really fortunate. There's a higher level, small hill that you can drive up, and it's just the best place. You get the view that you can almost see behind me. You drive up to this high point and you can look down and you can just see the whole site in front of you. And that, as long as you're fit and able, that you can see that. You won't be able to go up there once we launch because that will be obviously inside the exclusion zone. But so out of sort of launch activity, there's that. You can't get onto site at the moment because, as I say, we're still building, still constructing, so it is limited. We know people will want to come, and we know because people already are just turning up on Island and trying to find out if they can see what's going on. And actually, I'm going to mention the council again, which is so rare, really, to be. But they helped fund some research for the visitor potential because, these are really sort of fragile areas, dependent on small businesses. So tourism is another area that they really want to look at. And we know that, people, when they come, they will want. One of the things was they said they would want to see the base of the rocket. So we took that as sort of the baseline as to where we might be able to put a designated visitor area. So all these arrangements are still being worked through because, as ever, safety. It needs to be far enough away, but it needs to be a decent enough view. But I have just explained how you need to get there. There's no straightforward way of getting to the island with 2 inter-island ferries. We aren't intending to put on additional services. The focus, certainly for the first test launches, need to be on the launch, and we need to try and get that balance between those who would like to come and see it or those who will be able to come and see subsequent launches. But the actual detail, the best thing to do really is to go onto our website and sign up for our newsletter because we keep people up to date as to where we are and what we're doing. But all those plans are being worked on at the moment. Yeah. And live streaming for sure. We need to share this with as many people as possible. We imagine a lot of Shetland folk will want to come and be part of it as well. So it's going to be an exciting time. It's that age-old question as well. It's a launch window. It's not a specific date. It's not going to be an easy thing to manage this. But we're working on the detail just now.
Awesome. We have another question here, more to do with the regulatory process that you've been going through over the last few years. Creative Bites asking, was it difficult to apply for permission to launch rockets from Shetland, or was it a long process? Obviously, a vertical spaceport launching to orbit, that's not something the UK has ever done before, right? So how was that process on your end, getting that regulatory through for your spaceport license?
So, yes, it did take a long time. But our relationship with the Civil Aviation Authority is really good. They were doing it for the first time. We're doing it for the first time. And it is all about safety. So it can't be speedy. We think we're almost calling ourselves the trailblazers because we were first. Without a doubt, subsequent spaceports will benefit from what we've done. We always say, when we're putting together a spaceport user's manual or whatever, there are no templates on the internet. You can't just download and have a look how somebody else is doing it. Plus, it's not going to be right for the UK. In the really early days when we were looking at this and seeing whether the peninsula, we could get an exclusion zone, we actually used the FAA, the American equivalent, sort of distances and what have you. In the absence of having our own, that's what we did because because the Space Industries Act didn't come out till 2018, and then we were waiting for the guidance on that. So it has been quite a long process. But the CAA now are really looking at how different areas can be speeded up and how things might be done differently. So if people aren't aware, to launch a satellite in the UK, you need 4 licenses. You need one for the spaceport, which we first and only one at the moment. The UK, for vertical launch, you need a license for the range services, to make sure the airspace, the sea space, and everything on the ground is completely clear. We have that license too, and that's unusual as far as I understand, sort of in other global spaceports. Range services could be provided by somebody else, but we took the decision to keep that in-house. So we have 2 of the 4. The launch vehicle and the launch service provider has to have a license. So it was announced in January that Rocket Factory Augsburg have their license to launch from us. And then the 4th one is for the payload. So it is a really complicated and at times long-winded process, but for absolutely the right reasons. And I think the other thing to sort of emphasize here is, I don't know whether people imagine that once you've got your license, that's it. You're just waiting for work, waiting for a date for the launch. It absolutely isn't. You get your license, and so you have proved that you have considered all the safety angles and your processes and your plannings are coming into place. But actually getting your license means you just carry on the work with the Civil Aviation Authority, working on those safety models and the analysis. And, because every rocket company, launch vehicle provider, has different requirements. So it's a constant ongoing work. And we have a team of 5 just working on the licensing and how we adhere to it. And the CAA, and people may not know this, some people will if they have experience of them, it goes way beyond our operations. They look at the whole company, they look at the team, they look at every aspect of the business to make sure we are able to deliver safely. So in short, the answer is yes, it was a long process. We honestly believe it will be shortened because it needs to. When companies come to us, they need to be able to get a license, within a reasonable time, or else it's not going to be cost effective. So that's always going to be an overriding consideration.
Yeah. And speaking of the future, Supersonic Retro Propulsion are asking, does SaxaVord currently have any plans of building up infrastructure for any reusable rockets in the future, thinking landing pads or any sort of infrastructure surrounding that? Or would that be something more on your client side of thing, the launch provider side of thing?
I think I would say that. I think it's there's so much going on, isn't there? And there's so much advancement at the moment with how things could be done. And I think our focus at the moment is we have one pad. One pad complete. Our integration hangar will be fully complete by July. Integration hangar will be able to host 2 different launch service providers. And then we've got to prove that we can carry out these operations safely and get it into more sort of a routine. So I think whilst there are all these other considerations going on, and we're happy to get into conversations, really trying to just deliver what we need to deliver first has to be our focus. But of course, the companies that we deal with, the returning stages or whatever, is absolutely key, because sustainability is a really important factor for us, and also for the Scottish space sector. I think, when you compare it to the States, who've been doing this so well for so many years, we're at a different starting point, and we can build in the effort that we need to make on the environmental side. And we do that in an awful lot of ways. And I'll maybe stop at that point, because it would be good to come back to that as well. But so we're really keen to be working with potential clients who are looking at, fuels that are maybe less damaging, or the return, whatever. It's always something we'll be interested in working with clients on, for sure.
And one last one from the chat for now, Psychovi asking, what is the current status on the new launch pads that are currently in development? Of course, we have the one behind you, which is being used by RFA for the moment. There's been some rumours that there's a 2nd and a 3rd one on the way. So what's the status on those?
So we'll just turn it around a bit, just so you understand sort of the complexities. So we do have permission for 3 pads, and pad 1, Fredo it's called, is Rocket Factory Augsburg. And so they have taken that pad as a whole. So that is their pad. So no one else will be on that pad. So yeah, there is an urgency now to look at developing pads 2 and 3. Further work on 3, which is, if I move my head out of the way, right at the very end, that's pad 3, that's Elizabeth. So work is ongoing there at the moment. When a potential client comes to us, as I said, everyone has complete bespoke requirements. Whilst we were hoping for some standardization, at the moment we're not seeing a huge amount of that. It is looking at having to develop not just the pad, but the supporting infrastructure, especially for them. So maybe an additional integration hangar. You know, there are all these things to consider. And so we do that. We enter what we call a discovery phase with the company so that we really understand what they need. And that's important. And also really to then understand which pad is going to meet their needs, balanced off which pad is being asked for by another company, because we have more clients interested in coming to us than we have pads. I think probably people have worked that out, you know, already. You know, there are more than 3 companies really interested in coming to us. So it is working out in a way which pad suits which client best, and we're in that position.
Wonderful. Alex, back to you.
Yeah, I guess now it's the time to be like, well, we've been talking about the different companies, right, that are already using it, but this is one of the things that I wanted to go to, which is, so far, at least publicly that we know of, there's High Impulse, RFA, and I think recently Orbex also talked about launching from SaxaVord. And so it's like, right now, there's already companies willing to use and have used the spaceport. So one of the things is we recently had High Impulse actually in December on the series of live shows. How was the, you know, getting finally somebody to use the facilities and get to all of that test campaign that they did? And then we'll touch on other things that I already had in mind, as well as you were answering some of the questions from the chat.
Yeah, so we have a business development, head of sort of business development based in Munich, because we recognised from the start that, you know, French, German companies may be a little bit ahead of the UK companies, and that's really where the growth is. So Robin Huber, who is in head of Europe, he's based in Munich and working with these companies all the time. So as we're waiting for our planning permission for the launch site, and we're working on our license application, as has already been picked up in the questions, High Impulse, you know, start to understand what their timing is and what stage they're at, and they were looking to do some engine testing. So what we did, it was a really useful sort of start to the relationship. So they came to Scatster Airport, which is on mainland Shetland. It had just been closed down actually as an airport, but it does have planning to run engine tests for anything, to be honest. So that was suitable. So we organised that with the council to lease the hangarage and the space to run the engine tests. So that wasn't actually an Unst, but we were directly involved with them day to day. And I've talked about the plans and the processes that you need to work on when you really have no direct experience. So what it did was enable us to have real life experience with a launch provider like High Impulse, and for us to start to understand what would then come down the line when they're actually coming to the launch site. So everything from the commodities and the support services, and putting in the exclusion zone and notifications, even on a small level like that, you're still going to affect the local people, and there are formal agencies to be told. So what it did allow us to do on a really sort of small scale was learn with them as to how we would do this. And actually, we also had a French company, Latitude, around about the same time, They came to, this time it was the airfield in Unst. We have an airfield, it's not active, something that we will be looking at actually. So Latitude were there, and they too, understanding, how to put the exclusion zone and how to make it secure. And so all those different aspects, it was invaluable, and it allowed us to demonstrate how we were able to deal with all this safely, which is part of the development with the Civil Aviation Authority. It's that proof of actually undertaking some of this work, prior to becoming fully operational. So really good experience. And of course, like in any business, building those relationships with the key people, getting that trust, developing, the bonds so that we can preempt what they need, we can react, we can support, because that's what our job is, to be honest, supporting them to be able to achieve their launch. So really positive. I think they'd say the same too. Yeah, really valuable.
One of the other things that I'm curious about, because obviously I'm not familiar with the area, and I'm sure probably a bunch of people watching right now may not be familiar with the area. Whenever there's a test, or like just in general, do you guys have to like alert the local population and things like that, or is far enough away that they don't need to worry about any of that, or even road closures? As we've seen some other rocket companies that do need to close public roads, and so is that something that you guys have to also coordinate and things like that as well?
Yeah, so we did, and that's why I mentioned it on the engine testing, that yes, there are notifications to put out even with that level of activity, and just as a courtesy to the local people around the airport, we did, just because, it just makes sense. And the other thing it allowed us to do was also, noise monitoring for our environmentals. We need to know the effect of the sudden noise on the local wildlife, birds, that habitat, that sort of thing. So again, that was another real benefit. But yes, in the engine testing that happened last year with RFA, yes, there are notifications that go to the government agencies, so that the marine services and what have you. So yeah, a lot of notifications. So again, that's building up our way to make sure we can do this as efficiently as possible. And so I suppose when you're doing something like this, you learn so much by just doing something and, safely, and then learning from it and adapting and evolving and what have you. But yes, we do that, and we have security now 24/7. You'll see from the site, because it's a peninsula and it's actually quite flat, quite helpful really from a security point of view. So there is a gate, with a barrier over. So absolutely, on the engine testing on the launch site, absolutely everyone back 500 meters or so. But yeah, everything is done as it will be done in due course. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're seeing those views of the RFA test campaign there at SaxaVord. They had an anomaly on the stand, right? That was how did the spaceport had to deal with that? Because that was probably the first oops moment, right? If you will, that it was a serious sort of emergency or situation, risky situation that you had to deal with. Like, what sort of procedures did you have to put into effect for such an event?
So yeah, and we do get asked about this, and we are very open about it, and RFA have been very open about it too, haven't they? They responded incredibly quickly, actually, which has to be, really, congratulate them. So the live firing 4 engines was fantastic, and the footage is, even now when we see the footage, the goosebumps are coming up. And I just have to tell you this, because we're all working away in our offices, and we're not all based in Shetland. We have offices in mainland Scotland, just south of Inverness. So we've got people all over the place, and we're of course watching it like anyone else. And then the following day, I could hear everyone had the videos on their phones, and every so often you could hear, because because when you're on this journey with all the milestones that we've had to do, it's almost like, so you get planning permission, which was such a difficult process for something like this. You get planning permission, head down, what's the next one? And it just goes on and on. So to have the successful live firing in the way that it did was fantastic, and a real moment of, this is what it's all about. And then great. And then so you've then got the build up to the increased number of engines. So you've learnt from the live, and as you say, you've got all your plans. You've been working with emergency services. We've had a contingency planning working group for probably 4 years now, where we talk through the different scenarios. There is a plan on how we interact with each other, and this is all agreed, and then we exercise it. So we have had an exercise probably every quarter where we choose different aspects of what could go wrong. So we will have exercised this. And what was really interesting was, so this happened in August, and in September, we would have been exercising the engine fire. What's interesting, it is all laid down that, you need to exercise unless it actually happens. So if it does happen, that is in effect your exercise. So the plans are in place, but I suppose I keep repeating, it's not until you actually really do it that you test it, and then you find it still needs to evolve. And so nobody was within 500 meters of, the launch stall. So nobody was at risk. Absolutely nobody was at risk. And that's the key point. And so the engine caught fire, and so it was left to burn out. And then the emergency services were onto the launch site to see what actions needed to be taken, and the work continues on that, actually, very, very quickly, looking at, amazingly, from our point of view, the launch pad wasn't damaged in any great way, thank goodness. Just goes to credit to our construction team who, put the concrete in and what have you. So you debrief, you look at it, you review, and you all learn from it together with our client RFA, who we continue to support, and they are starting to come back now in the build up to the testing for this spring. And I think from a company point of view, so I was there, and I was stood with some of the security guys, and the BBC were on the beach beside the peninsula. So this happened around about 8 o'clock. So it's on the news at 10 o'clock. But we were really absolutely delighted with the way it was reported, because we'd spent a lot of time with the press so that they understand this is what happens in space. We've all seen it. And if anything, we wouldn't have wanted this to happen, but it did happen, and we don't feel it has done us any damage at all. Yeah. And actually, it's elevated SaxaVord Spaceport onto the world stage of, this is a spaceport. We can handle these things when they happen. So a real mix of everything, actually, but we learned a huge amount. We will continue learning, and it happens, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, if anything, our audience is used to the explosions and whatnot, and that's part of the industry, right? It's part of we usually say it's, space is hard and everything, but it truly is, right? And so, it's part of the way of getting to space. Sometimes things break, and as you mentioned, you got to have plans for when things do break, and be able to put everything into a safe state. One of the things that I'm sort of curious about is, like, when there's none of this happening, what is SaxaVord doing, like the day-to-day operations when there's nobody around? What's sort of the state of the operations at that point, for example?
So a huge amount of activity, and the team is around about 90 people now, and that's a real mix of, because we look after the rocket companies too, and the personnel, so we have to house them, look after them, feed them, all that side of things. So that's a major undertaking, when you have sort of 35, 40 from RFA. So you've got, I think that this was the one I thought, if I don't jot something down here, it's just like, it is so busy. we're constantly recruiting because, as I said, so when you set up a spaceport in the UK, you don't have anybody you can recruit from because nobody's done it. So you have to work with many of our team are ex-military. The launch team are pilots, aircrew that were in the Air Force. A lot of us are ex-military. I am as well, actually, on an operations side. Our range team is mainly ex-army, but not all. So we've got to recruit, and these jobs keep evolving, and that's quite difficult because being clear on somebody's job role, and then when you maybe have a new role appear, you still don't have spaceport personnel sitting around in the UK waiting for. So we've got to encourage people to come in from different sectors. We don't just want ex-military, and we haven't got that. We need that input. We need younger people. So we do all sorts. We have summer placements for 6 weeks. And we took 10 undergraduates last summer because it's really important we bring young people into the industry. It also means we can take a look at them and see whether they're future employees for us as well. So we run things like that. The logistics, as we've talked about, replenishing commodities. We're still constructing, as I mentioned, the integration hangars still for completion. We are clearing land at time for new concrete pads for different equipment, and in summer 23. So the site was used in World War II, so it was RAF score, the peninsula. So alongside the really state-of-the-art equipment, we have got bunkers and all sorts from World War II, which I personally love because it's got such a story to tell. But it also means that we have to be careful, and every time we want to put some new equipment in, tracking telemetry equipment, antennae, whatever, we have to strip the ground first. So summer 23, our archaeologists found a Bronze Age burial site.
Wow.
I know. I think we're probably the only spaceport that has its own Bronze Age burial site. So luckily, because the site is quite big, as you can see, we were just able to move what we needed to be put somewhere else. But that site, in fact, the large sort of brown patch is the Bronze Age burial site, waiting for further work to be done to see what we can actually do with it. But it's just a real reminder that this location has been so important from day one, minus day one, whatever. So that sort of thing is happening, our security, our ecological work and our sustainability efforts. So we have an ecological clerk of works who goes out daily to check, we have bird surveys, we've got an otter tunnel that goes under the road from one side to the other. We have to monitor this. There are 3 times at the moment on our permission that we can't launch, and one of those periods is bird breeding season. And again, every spaceport has its own wildlife. We're not unique in this. The issue is we have different wildlife and birds too, Cape Canaveral, obviously. So you can't say it doesn't affect them, it won't affect ours, because they're different. So we have more data now and survey work on the wildlife and birds, and everything that we've seen so far really demonstrates they are not affected. They might look up a little bit, but they're really not affected. So all this work is going on all the time. We have a lot of visitors. I mean, government departments, interested agencies, potential clients. We have to show people what we're doing. We have the emergency services, as I've mentioned, to build. We have a lot of visitors, and we have to show people what is happening because still people don't know, despite what we've said and the 1,800 articles we had about us after the anomaly. We are still trying to get the message over. The UK has a spaceport, so we have to have those visitors. And then in amongst all that, we're doing our day-to-day development work for the safety side, which is the most important part. But education. We had Leicester Space Center ran a space camp just last week for 35 Shetland kids for a whole week, fully funded from UK Space Agency. Fantastic. We have to get everyone excited about what we're doing. We do a lot on that.
Yeah, and you were mentioning about recruiting. Is there like a place that people can go to be able to sign up and work for you guys? Like that's probably one of the things that we're also trying to get across here as well, to get the help out for some of these companies that come to NSF, because we have a lot of nerds, and some of them maybe even into the industry as well. So, if there's any place that some of them might want to go to and register or something and be able to help.
So just at this moment, we are refreshing the website. The website was done really quickly about 5 years ago, and it is dated. We know that, because things move so quickly. We will put a careers and a jobs page onto the new website, so there will be a way to get to it. If anyone has a CV and wants it to come in now, it would just be info@saxavord.com. So it is coming, because we do want people to come and see what's and I think, opening up to people so they understand it's not just for those that, want the real technical, experience. We have an in-house lawyer, and probably the only spaceport, that wasn't, who would have thought that was a job? We have a communities officer, as we've said, working with the local people and keeping them on board and keeping them involved is really important. So we have somebody to do that. It's not always about the jobs in the white coats or whatever, but so definitely the website in due course.
Okay, Ryan, do we have any more questions before we go into some of the other details that, some people may be wondering about those as well. So let's hit the chat and see what's up.
We've got a couple more questions just as we get to the end of the hour here. First of all, both aviation related. Mighty Unlikely is curious as to what airspace restrictions will be needed for your location. You mentioned earlier that SaxaVord is doing all of the range, safety, protection, that stuff in-house. Immediately to the north of you, off the top of my head, you have, Icelandic airspace, Greenland airspace. To the east, you have Norwegian airspace. So how does that all kind of play together? How do you work with other international partners to make sure that the range is clear?
So that will be with the Civil Aviation Authority and the Department of Transport, actually. That's done, the international agreements, it will be done by government. That isn't something that we would do direct, but they have to obviously fully understand exactly what we're talking about for each exclusion or safety zone. And again, that differs per client. So when you're doing your license, what we aim to do was as reasonably standard as possible, so that we can just then tailor it once we know the detail from each license. But we also we had to apply for an airspace change order as well. But this is some of the other detail, as well as the weather. We looked at all these aspects. We looked at the data on aviation and how often it's full, and the same for the marine landscape. How many boats are usually in there? Not that many. In fact, in whatever area we looked at, it was a relatively clear zone, which is one of the supporting factors for why SaxaVord was a good place to start. But generally, yes, notifications to airmen, notifications to mariners, all that sort of, notifications and working with the different agencies. And one thing I hadn't realised when we started this was, some of these government agencies like Marine Scotland is set up by legislation, obviously, because they all are, and, their parameters of how they work and what have you. Because space is so new, something like a stage of a rocket falling into the sea wasn't actually dealt with in the legislation when the organisation was set up. So really having to work closely with all these different government organisations to find a way through that works for everybody. And in some ways, not necessarily Marine Scotland, but in some ways, some of them may need to be going back to get their legislation altered to be able to deal with these activities that we're now seeing.
Yeah. And another question here. You mentioned earlier an airfield, and we have a question here from Keith asking about the Baltasand airfield. Is that under your control? Is there anything that you're looking to do there in the future with that site?
So we do have we have leased Baltasand Airfield from the council, yes, actually, because I mentioned that was a really useful place in the early days for the engine testing with Latitude. In time, we will run the engine tests with the companies on the launch site. We also have some ground stations at the airfield. So it is a resource. We're looking at how else it could support what we're doing and what it might be needed for. But no definite plans, but it could make a real difference to what we're trying to do.
Awesome. Alex?
Yeah, so we've been focusing a little bit on like what you have done and what's been happening recently, but I want to look a bit into the future. There's a lot of companies out there trying to make bigger rockets. How big of a rocket can you actually launch from SaxaVord? Because I can imagine somebody being like, okay, here's our Starship-sized rocket. Can we launch it from here? Like, is that even a possibility or something? I can imagine some of the answers, but I'm really curious about what is the sort of limit to the size of the rocket.
So yeah, we did. Yeah. As we've said, things just keep changing and developing far more quickly than we perhaps thought. And originally, we did design our facilities to accommodate small launch vehicles, and that's what most of our current partners are looking at. But we can see the market is evolving. Of course, it is. So at the moment, our permission is for a rocket for up to 30 meters, but we do need to look at this, and I'm perhaps going to come back to, we are aware of this, and we are speaking with people, and going forward it can be something to look at. But at the moment, really, our focus is on building the infrastructure and that we need just now. But yeah, looking at our capabilities as well to see if we could handle larger launch vehicles and payloads, but without compromising, what we've able to achieve so far and our safety and efficiency. It's that balance off, isn't it? But certainly we understand we will need to look at that.
Yeah, and another thing that I had in mind as well, of course, the Shetland Islands are in the Scotland area, right? But there's multiple companies coming to the area. Like you just mentioned, you have good relationship in Germany, France area, because there's High Impulse, there's RFA. We've known, at least in the past, some US companies also willing to go to SaxaVord. Is there any sort of special kind of thing that you need to do to be able to have those relationship with other companies outside of Europe and things like that might be affecting those things?
So we do speak to different clients from around the world, and the reason the American was mentioned, of course, was the UK government had engaged Lockheed Martin to do the Pathfinder launch with change to ABL systems, which of course has now changed again. So where that is, I don't have any more information on that at the moment at all, because that's obviously not going to happen just yet. But I suppose it comes back to, as I was speaking before, at the moment we have 3 pads. That's that is some capacity as it is, and what we're doing all the time is understanding clients who are coming to us and their timings as well, because trying to look at the likelihood of a company being able to meet the timescales that they maybe say outwardly, really digging down into the detail as to whether they are going to hit those targets, being realistic, allows us to plan far better. I think I'll just be open. In the early days, in our naivety, we imagined that maybe some rocket companies, launch clients would share a pad. That doesn't seem to be the case. They absolutely do seem to want their own, and that varies again with some clients. Some clients might be more open. I think we're at such an early stage. It's looking at all these different factors. But we do speak. It's probably only sort of 12 months ago, we were on a US Space Command meeting where, there is not enough launch capability in the States. They are having to look elsewhere. There is going to be a real shortage of launch capability. So we do look at all sorts of different clients opportunities, and look for us to try and work out what is the best use of the 3 pads that we have, and in time whether additional pads could be put onto the site.
Yeah, one of the other things, this is like totally just off my mind right now, because you were talking about potentially, future additional pads and things like that. And it is true that at least in the US, they're at a limit, like the Cape, Wallops, they're getting even Vandenberg and Kodiak. They're having lots and lots of launches from multiple places, lots of different providers, and they are in need of being able to launch more often from other places.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about things like supporting offshore launches, like having a way of providing the way of putting like I don't know if you know what I mean, but like
I
if
do.
somebody
Yeah, I
were
do.
to say I want to launch offshore from the Shetland Islands, can you support something like that? I'm assuming that it will be something in the future, of course.
Something in the future, and yes, we are aware of it, and yes, we either come across these companies that are serious, and they're having significant European funding put into looking at this. So yes, it is something that we could look at. Yep. Yeah. Of course, if it's another way of providing, in effect, another launch pad, even if it's very different to what we're looking at the moment, it is something to be considered. Yep.
Yeah, and it's not a secret that SaxaVord is not the only place in Europe, of course, but it is definitely at least among the most active ones. Like we're talking about High Impulse, we've talked about RFA, other companies also trying to get their launches out of SaxaVord. So how does that position SaxaVord in relevance with like the current European spaceflight industry? Because this is one of the things as well that we try to highlight here in this series as well, that we are doing stuff here in Europe. It's not just China, the US, or something like that. There's real rockets being made and being tested here, and of course as well in SaxaVord. How do you see yourselves among the rest of the European spaceflight industry?
I think we are a little bit behind, though, Alex. You're giving us, that's maybe why. And I think, once we have a successful test flight, that will make the massive difference, won't it, for people to wake up, for sure. But so we've always said, our competitors are Andoya and S-Range in Sweden, and Andoya was trying to launch this week, weren't they? And we would be absolutely behind that. I'm not going to say we would like to be first, but if they are really that bit further ahead, that is good for the industry, isn't it? We would support it. We will be the first to congratulate them if they manage to do this, partly because we know how difficult it is. But so we will absolutely. There is so much demand. It won't mean their success will have an adverse effect on us. If anything, again, it's about raising that awareness about this capability in Europe. So, we were in Milan last year signing an MOU with Norway. So working together where we can, but we are still competitors. But there may be a time where a launch provider launches from both sites. I mean, who knows? We're still at quite early stages. We will need to have another conversation in about, and then we can reflect on what we thought and whether it actually came to be, because everything is so fast moving and having to adapt and evolve the whole time. Who knows where we'll be? Who knows? And our 30 launches a year could have increased to 50. Who knows? Don't quote me on that. But we're just at that stage where it's just all starting to get going.
Yeah, and it's really exciting. I mean, this is also sort of the point of these shows, right? Like, sure, maybe some of the things have not happened yet, but they are in the works. And I think that's really interesting, really exciting. And I guess it's an excuse to bring you on here again next time around, I guess, in a couple of years, maybe. But, Debbie, thanks for being here at NSF, for all of these wonderful answers. I'm sure a lot of people are still having more questions. I don't know, Ryan, do we have any more questions from the chat that are left over there on our queue?
Unless you want to do one final wild card question, not that serious, but Ari guest very quickly are wondering, is human spaceflight anywhere in your roadmap? Just out of pure curiosity.
I get asked that quite a lot, actually, and I think you just have to say, it just goes, it's such a perfect question to end on, because I've just said, who knows? We adapt almost daily as to the speed with which things are happening in some ways. So who knows? Possibly not in my lifetime. At least I hope to be retired watching it from a distance after doing all this. But yeah, possibly more in your lifetime than mine, but I don't know.
It's definitely one of those things that we usually say, that it's like it could be anything, right? But we're gonna be here covering it, and of course, we're gonna be following along whatever happens at SaxaVord, and all of that will be thanks to our members. It's something that we couldn't be doing without them. So thanks to our members, our launch directors and flight engineers here at NSF, you make the show possible, and of course, many other things possible. So Ryan Caden, also thanks for grabbing all of the questions as usual in the last two episodes, and also thanks Debbie for coming here to NSF again. We need to get you back a couple of years from now, maybe, and talk about all of the exciting stuff that has happened until then. And I'm sure there's going to be one company out there from SaxaVord that's doing a lot of things coming soon, and we're going to have them here next week on Europe's Future in Space. That's going to be RFA. We're going to have Stefan Brezhnek. I think it is the name. I'm sorry. I tried to learn that. Next week, I'll be able to pronounce it correctly, of course, but we're going to have him next week on Europe's Future in Space. We're going to have RFA. As I said at the beginning, it's very, natural that we have SaxaVord first, and now one company that is launching from there first. They're going to be testing, so we're going to ask a lot of questions about that. We're going to try and get some of the questions as well from members. But don't forget, we have lots of things going on in the pipeline. We also have tonight a launch from Vandenberg as well that we're going to be trying to cover. And, until all of that, see you on the next one.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Thank you.
And here we go.
We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be nominal.
RA-68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, Atlantis.
Water towers, fly! Yes! Tango down to nominal.
Flighting downside speed off. Bring in SPD off. It's orange! 145!
Oh my God!
Decollage! What is it? Put that in the big bag, Eagle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
The methane will be igniting in the flare, correct?